I have been wanting to make this video for a really long time already, and I think there is no better time than to do it now. I wanted to talk about the neuroscience of why people lose control of themselves, why people do horrible and unspeakable things. And it's really important that we understand it because it has to do with the architecture of our brain and how it is put together, how we are wired. What I'm sharing with you today is inspired by the book Emotional Intelligence from Daniel Goleman, and it will be really helpful for you because by the end of this video you will understand what an emotional hijacking is and how you can be conscious of it so it will not take over your brain. And you will also understand why people do horrible things. Firstly, we must understand how the brain is built, how it grew and evolved over time. Because at first on top of our spine sits the brainstem. This is on top of the spine and it is regulating functions like breathing, heartbeat, and controlling and managing all our organs. We don't have conscious control over that. But with time, we evolved and we started to grow around it the limbic brain, which is the emotional brain. This is the center of the brain which helps us memorize and learn. For example, if you have once tasted food that made you feel bad, in the future you will memorize that and you will no longer eat that food, you will no longer touch it. Like for example with me, I had an experience with macaroni and cheese, a bad experience, and since that I can't smell it and I can't taste it, I can't eat it, it's just blocking me from doing it. That's because of the memory that we have stored in the limbic brain. But the reason why we as humans are so evolved and so much more intelligent than other species is because we have the neocortex, which is much larger than in any other species on the planet. And this is our rational and thinking brain. It helps us to comprehend what we are perceiving, what we are receiving with our senses. The neocortex adds a thought to our feelings, and because we have this neocortex, we can also have feelings about our thoughts, imaginations, about art, culture, civilization. We can have thoughts and feelings about anything. And the neocortex ability to strategize and do long-term planning is our survival's edge. And the pure reason why art, civilization, and culture exists is just because of the neocortex. Without that, we wouldn't see art. We wouldn't be able to process it. It wouldn't exist without that. And the neocortex connection to the limbic brain is also what creates the mother-child bond. This is seen in all mammals, and it creates the long-term commitment for the child to bring it up with time, to allow the child to develop and fully mature before you let them on their own. And in contrast, reptiles, for example, don't have that. They don't have this mother-child bond. That's why when those young reptiles hatch, they have to immediately run and fight for their own survival because otherwise they could be cannibalized by their own mother. And with the neocortex, we can even have feelings about our feelings. That's really quite unique to us humans. And as humans, we have a greater range of reactions to the feelings that we experience in our life. For example, when a rabbit is fearful, it doesn't have such a wide range of reactions. It's either gonna hide and freeze or it's gonna run away. And as humans, when we experience fear, our social system is so complex that we have to have a wide variety of different reactions. For example, when we feel fear, we can decide to call 911 instead of to just run or hide. So you understand that it's really much more complex in us humans, and the more complex the social system is, the more flexible our reactions have to be. And you know, since the neocortex was growing after the limbic brain, after our emotional brain, you can see that progression of our brain. That is also the reason why the limbic brain and our emotional brain has so much power over us and can sometimes be even stronger than the neocortex. I want to share an example that I read in the book as well, where a burglar has been released from prison in New York. He decided that he no longer wants to be a criminal, but because of the financial situation with his girlfriend and their 3-year-old child, he decided that he has to do one more break-in. So he broke into an apartment in New York where 2 women were living. And he thought those women were not at home, so he entered the apartment but found out that one of the women was still there. When he noticed that, he immediately threatened her with a knife and he tied her to a chair. A little bit later, when he wanted to leave, the second woman came home and he also tied her up on a chair and threatened her with a knife. While he was tying her up though, the other woman was saying, this will have consequences because I remember your face and I will help the police to catch you. And in that moment, he just lost it. He started to smash them with a soda bottle at first until they were unconscious, and then he stabbed them multiple times, and that case was later known as the Career Girl murders. And 25 years later, he was saying about that one moment that he just went bananas. He just felt like his brain exploded, and he can't explain why he did it. And that one moment had an impact for other people and also for him for the rest of his life. So how can this happen? How can he commit a crime and later say, I don't know what happened, I just went bananas, my head exploded? This is what we call a neural hijacking, and we want to talk about this now. Because the human brain also has two amygdalas. Those are two almond-shaped parts of the limbic brain that are just above the brainstem and underneath the limbic brain. And I really want you to remember this word amygdala because it's going to be really important for the rest of this video. Because the amygdala is the place where we store our emotional memories. There was a case where a young man's amygdalas have been removed because they wanted to prevent seizures from happening with him. And that worked, but at the same time he also had a pure indifference about anything. He didn't feel the bond anymore to his parents, to his friends. He didn't feel an emotional connection to them anymore. He was just indifferent about anything. He could just sit by himself all day. He didn't want to do anything. He didn't have motivation for anything. He was just emotionally dead, so to say. And we have to understand that all passions, all passionate emotions stem from the amygdala. That is rage, anger, fear, but also cooperation and affection. And the amygdala is even the part of the brain that also triggers us crying. When we are sad, when we are very happy, that's the amygdala signaling that. So really interesting are these moments of passionate action that we regret later. Another example is a woman was driving for 2 hours to Boston. She went to see her boyfriend and she was really looking forward to see him because he was also bringing her a gift, a very special artwork that she has been waiting for months. And after they finished with the brunch, she was saying, hey, there's this movie playing nearby. I would really love to watch it with you. And her boyfriend said, actually, I can't. I have football practice. After she heard that, she got up, she took that artwork, she threw it in the trash and stormed out. Later, she said that what she regretted was not that she got up and walked out, but that she threw away that precious artwork. Why would she do something like this? Something that was so important to her, in one instant, because of something that somebody else said, she was just willing to throw it away. She didn't care anymore about it. And now it gets very important because the amygdala has a very powerful position in our brain because it constantly asks to every sensory input the following questions. And I would really like you to remember these questions. So whatever the brain perceives, if it goes through the amygdala, it asks, is this something I hate? Is this something that hurts me? Or is this something I fear? Because if it does, the amygdala takes control over the brain and it sends a signal to the rest of the brain, and it's basically becoming the orchestrator for whatever follows. So the amygdala is basically an alarm system, and whenever an alarm is triggered, it sends signals to the entire brain and it mobilizes the body's fight or flight system, and it gets the body ready for movement, for action. It also heightens the senses, which make you even more alert. Eyes are bigger, you're listening more, you're very active, and you're scanning the whole environment. During an emotional emergency situation, the amygdala runs and drives most of the brain, even the rational mind. For example, when a man was in London, he was just having some good food and then he went to stroll alongside the canal. Then in one moment he saw this young woman looking with a frozen face down into the canal in a state of shock. And when he saw her, he didn't even know what happened, but he just jumped with all his clothes into the water. The moment he was there, he realized that he's saving her toddler who fell into the canal. It is so fast that you don't even have a rational explanation for why it happened. This is also what the amygdala was causing. So it's not always negative, but it can also be the reason why we are able to save somebody's life. And the reason why the amygdala can react so quickly is because all the sensory input from the eyes and ears is first going to the thalamus. The thalamus, you can imagine, is like a USB-C hub where all the signals go in. From there, there's a small synapse that goes directly to the amygdala, and from the thalamus, the rest of the sensory input goes to the neocortex, to the thinking brain. That's why the amygdala can react before the neocortex, which needs some more time to initiate a more thought-through response. Research has shown that in the first few milliseconds of us perceiving something, we not only subconsciously comprehend what it is, but we are also able to decide whether we like it or not. And our emotions have a mind of their own, and they can have opinions independently of what the rational mind thinks. And those unconscious opinions that we have are emotional memories that are stored in the amygdala. Then there's a second part of this that is important, which is the hippocampus. The hippocampus provides context to the sensory input. You can, for example, distinguish between a bear in a zoo or a bear that is in your backyard. That's very important that we have that context as well. So for example, when we are driving really fast and we are taking over another car and that leads to an almost crash, our hippocampus stores where it happened, with what car it happened and who was with us. But the amygdala is what sends anxiety through our body whenever we are in a situation that resembles that past experience that we had with that car, for example. So to summarize it, the hippocampus can recognize the face of your cousin, and the amygdala adds to it that you don't like her. So how are those emotional memories stored? Well, when we are under intense stress, can even be moments of joy, the chemicals that are released in the body that heighten the senses to fight or flight are stamping also a very vivid memory of that experience in our amygdala. That's why we remember, for example, our first date or exactly where we were when 9/11 happened. And the more intense the amygdala arousal, the more vivid and stronger the imprint of that memory is, which is a great thing for animals to have when they have a vivid memory of things that threatened them or things that gave them pleasure. But for us humans in our social structure, these past emotions can be really faulty guides in the present. We can't, for example, sit in an office and we are mad at a coworker and then we can just reach across the table and start to hit them. We can't do that. So if the amygdala has a match with an old emotional memory, it doesn't even have to be an exact match. It's enough if there's just a few tiny details or hints are similar to what you have experienced in the past, then the amygdala acts before it has full confirmation of the situation, and it commands the body to react with thoughts, emotions, and reactions that it has learned a long time ago. But that's exactly the problem, because our learned reactions are often outdated because of the fact that many emotional memories stem from the first years of our lives. In the first years of our lives, the hippocampus, which is important for context, and the rational mind are not fully developed yet. But the amygdala, on the other side, is close to fully developed at birth. So those emotional memories from those early years of life between child and caretaker are so potent and difficult to understand as an adult because a child doesn't have any words to rationalize what's happening. There are no words connected to these emotions. And then when we react later in life, we can't assign any thoughts or any explanations to it. We can just say, I don't know why I did it. I don't know what happened. You don't have the words to explain it. The amygdala also has a very important function for our survival, which is, for example, if you're sleeping and in the middle of your sleep you hear that the attic is collapsing over your head and you are immediately from deep asleep to wide awake and you're there to scan the environment. That's the amygdala waking you up in such an emergency situation. Well, later you might figure out that it was actually just a book that fell from the shelf. It was not actually the roof over your head falling on you, but that's exactly what explains how the amygdala is able to react before it has all the data. It already takes action and it already helps you to survive before you can even figure out, oh, actually that was just a book, okay, no worries. So in some situations, it can also really save our lives again. And this primitive minor brain system in mammals is also the main brain system in non-mammals, reptiles, amphibians. It's very fast, it's a very fast system, but it's not very precise. And that can be okay for an animal if it just hears something and it just runs away. But for us humans, in our social environments, it can have disastrous effects if we are acting from this minor brain system alone. For example, a waitress was just about to serve 6 plates of food to her guests, and then she saw a woman from the back which had similar hair like the woman that her ex-husband left her for, and in the moment she saw her, she just dropped all the plates. Later she found out that it was just a woman that resembled her. It was not actually that one, but it has very disastrous effects. She could lose her job, guests could be unhappy, and this is a small minor incident, but you can imagine how bigger incidents can have even more horrible effects on other people. So because this system is very imprecise, it's also no wonder that we have so little explanation for our actions when we are in this emotional hijacking, when we are losing control. Also, when we're in the middle of it, we can't even explain what we're doing and why. It's just happening. But not every situation requires our amygdala to react and take control over our brain. The amygdala also has a damper switch, which is the prefrontal lobes. The prefrontal lobes are in action when you're having a fearful reaction or an angry reaction, but you're able to control your feeling in order to deal with the situation more effectively or appropriately. And normally the prefrontal cortex is also in charge of our emotional reactions right from the start. Because you might remember, when the sensory input from the eyes or ears enters the thalamus, most of the sensory input then is sent over to the neocortex. There's only this one synapse which is going to the amygdala at the same time, but most of it is going to the neocortex so we can assess the situation more. And if the situation requires an emotional reaction, then the prefrontal cortex is working hand in hand with the limbic brain, with the amygdala, and other parts of the brain. So when there is a sensory input, the prefrontal cortex goes through a series of different reactions with a different risk and benefit ratio, and it chooses the one which is most appropriate. So for an animal, that would mean when to run and when to attack. And for humans, it means when to run, when to attack, but also when to persuade, when to stonewall, when to seek sympathy, when to provoke guilt, when to whine, and so on. So we have a very wide variety of possible reactions. And this neocortical response is slower than the amygdala hijack because it is more considered and involves more circuitry. In the past, they were even treating people with mental illnesses the way that they were removing parts of their brains, or they would destroy the connections between the neocortex and the limbic brain. And what happened was that people just completely lost their emotional lives. They didn't have any emotions anymore. They didn't feel happy. They didn't feel sad. They were just in a gray neutrality. But now we will get more to the part of why this book is even called Emotional Intelligence and why it is so important. They were making studies on people that had brain injuries, and some had lost part of their left brain, some have lost part of their right brain, or it had to be removed, or they had lesions in there. And it had very interesting impact on their life, because what people found was that the left brain seemed to be the off switch for those emotions. It was able to regulate those really negative, harmful emotions that we experience, whereas the right side of the brain was connected with negativity, anger, or fear. So what they found was that people that had problem with their left brain and part of their left brain was impacted or removed, that they started to be more angry, more easily agitated, more fearful, and live in these negative states more. They were not even able to manage those negative states anymore. Whereas people who removed part of their right side of the brain were giggling when they had the scans. They didn't really care about the results, how they will do. And one woman said that her husband had to remove part of her right brain, and after that he came home, he didn't react that easily anymore. He was a very pleasant person to be around, and he was much more affectionate towards her. So what they concluded from this was that the left part of the prefrontal lobe is actually keeping those negative states in check and inhibiting the right part of the brain. So the connection between the limbic brain, the emotional brain, and the neocortex, the thinking brain, is the battle between the head and the heart. When you're, for example, swept with emotion, you might say something like, I just can't think straight. Your rational mind is turned off in that moment because the limbic brain has taken over. And that's also why continued emotional distress for children in their early development can have a really negative impact on the development of their rational brain, because they don't have space and capacity to develop their thinking mind, because they're constantly in emotions of stress. So the emotional brain does not control only anger, but also compassion. And emotional intelligence has nothing to do with IQ, has nothing to do with intellect. But the problem is that we often leave the development of our emotional intelligence, our EQ, to chance. We don't really put attention there. And when the brain is damaged in the connection between the limbic brain and the neocortex, person might still have great intelligence, might still have a great IQ, but they have a terrible EQ. And they're also really bad at making decisions, because our feelings are indispensable for making rational decisions. For example, to questions, who should you marry, where should you study, where should you live? It's not enough to just make an intellectual decision, but we also need the emotions and our past experience, for example, heartbreak, or when we made a bad investment. We need these emotional memories so we can make better decisions. So even if in the first moment you think that emotions have nothing to do with rationality, they are very important for each other. And normally the thinking brain is the executive of our brain, of our bodies. Besides the situations where emotions take over and our brain basically goes rampant and we do these horrible, unexplainable things. How we do in life is determined not only by our IQ, but also a lot by our EQ, actually much more than our intellect. And it's important that we harmonize the head and the heart. And now that I've explained to you the neuroscience behind why people do these horrible things, I also want to talk about what happened. You definitely heard of Charlie Kirk, that he has been assassinated. And this is a testament of how some people have not enough emotional intelligence, that they're so swept with emotions, with anger and rage, that they can't even understand a simple law of don't kill another human. In that case, it must have been even worse, because it's not just a momentary emotional hijacking, that the person just reacts wrongly in a specific moment, but that must have been over a long period of time, so that person must have had the intellect turned off for very long, or the connection between intellect and emotions, and they were able to do something so gruesome. We all had moments when we react. We all have. Just yesterday, my girlfriend and I, we were having an argument, and I just walked out and I was going into the forest for 2 hours. But we need to be aware of when it's happening, when we have this amygdala hijacking. We can recognize it, you now know about it, whenever you feel like you're reacting in a way that is inappropriate, or is you can't even really make sense of it, why it's happening. You can't explain with words exactly why you're reacting this moment. You know it's an amygdala hijacking, and already becoming conscious of that, you can deal with it much more efficiently, much more consciously. Charlie Kirk, for example, is a person that I have been sometimes watching, and to me, he seemed that he's really most of the time somebody that has not only great IQ, is really smart, but he also has a really great emotional intelligence. Because even though people are swearing at him, they're saying him how much they hate him, they're threatening him and his life and his family, and he's still able to stay respectful and calm in front of those people, that is a sign of very mature and high levels of emotional intelligence. On the other extreme, however, I can think of a lot of people that are especially involved in politics who get so angry and so furious at the littlest things that they already in the moment are starting to throw stuff, or they're celebrating somebody else's death and they're sharing it publicly. This is something so horrible and unexplainable, but it is people who don't have a proper emotional intelligence. And this is something that unfortunately most of us have to learn ourselves. We get some level by seeing our parents, how they react in certain situations. But as I already said, we don't put enough attention to our emotional intelligence. I hope you learned something in this video, because when I was reading this book, it really helped me to recognize exactly the neuroscience of why we react in really weird ways sometimes, because it also happens to me. I'm triggered about something and I can't even say why. I really don't find the words, because those things happened early in childhood and you don't really have the words for explanation. You don't have a rational mind to make sense of it, and then react later in adulthood because there's a situation that merely is similar to what you have experienced in the past and you react the same way. but we are humans. We can be above that. And that's why it's important that we can keep our cool, that we take some time to calm down before we do anything and really assess how we want to move forward. It can really seem like we live in a sick world, and mental health has been a developing issue in the past years. Now that we have social media and everybody has a camera in their hands, we can also see these things a lot more. And I can just send love out to especially those people that have been affected, the families, the friends who have been directly affected by these horrible crimes. My girlfriend and I have this YouTube channel. Together we are Petra and Raphael, and we make videos that help people to step into their future self. If you want to do something really good for yourself, we also created these beautiful shirts that say thank you in the front and I love you in the back. Those are the two most powerful positive affirmations, and if you wear these on your body, the energy in your body will change, and also when you walk around it in public, people will see these affirmations. You can remind them for what they might have forgotten. You might even save somebody's life with that. So it's a really beautiful thing to do for yourself and to do for the world around you. Thank you so much for being here. If you're more interested in this, we also made a video talking about what the different emotions do exactly to our bodies.